Test, test, 1, 2, 3, 4, test, test.
Okay, do it now.
I did not hear you.
Can you do it again? No.
It's showing you're not unmuted.
Oh, it went out though, so y'all don't have something open in y'all's
Okay.
room. Hold on.
Oh, the mic. Wait, I don't think we shut the mic.
The mic is it's going.
No, you need to click that button and then click. No, it's sure. Okay, this.
Which one?
The speakers need to be a different one.
Test, 1, 2, 3, 4, test, test.
Hold on, let me check the, I don't remember what you said.
It's probably y'all aren't sending the sound over the HDMI.
Yep.
Yes, hey, the one, the
Mason, or-
HDMI. Yes, we can. Yeah. you need to
Yes,
click
we
the-
can.
Probably not sending the signal over the HDMI. So
This
you
one?
can Go to
Oh.
sound and Windows.
It should say 2 Extron. That is not an option. Okay, it should say AMD high definition audio device. Okay, you want to give it a try now?
What's that?
Can you give it a try now? Start talking.
1 second.
Test, 1, 2, 3, 4.
That was it. We got you.
Now we're on.
Okay, y'all got me now?
Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
different name once we switched computers.
Can you hear us, Anthony, via Zoom?
Yes, I can hear y'all fine.
Okay, perfect.
Good afternoon, everyone. If we could please take our seats, we can get started today. That's nice music, though. That had to be Linda. See, I want to blame everything on Linda. No ifs, ands, or buts. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. As chair of the Arkansas School Safety Commission, I'd like to call our meeting on June 8th, 2022 to order. If you have not, if Angela has not gotten your signature, please make sure that you do sign in for today. And Angela, just for the record, I would also like to say thank you so very much for all the help that you provide. It's greatly appreciated. Before I actually get started on anything today, we did have a tremendously unfortunate loss in our law enforcement family. Officer Jeremiah Story of the Perry County Sheriff's Office was killed the other day, and his funeral is actually going on today. I unfortunately couldn't attend, but I would like to ask each and every one of you to join me in a moment of silence to honor him and to pray for he and his family and loved ones. Thank you. I also would like to mention that we do have a person from the Attorney General and also Secretary Cook are attending the funeral. And Drew Evans from the Attorney General's office is sitting in for General Rutledge today. Drew, thank you very, very much for being here. And the other thing that I want to mention is that I want to clarify a little bit some things. And I don't want to get ahead of myself. So let's go ahead and you all should have received a copy of the minutes. And if you take a second and please review them, and I will entertain a motion at the appropriate time. We have a motion to approve. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Angela, yes, ma'am. It's hard to see you way down there. Yes, it was Chief Hollenbeck that made the initial, and then was it Lori Poston that seconded? And I didn't hear, yes, ma'am. So don't leave them on? Okay, and that I assume that would mean even me. Okay. We're good. No worries. Okay, so minutes passed. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to have a presentation, and she's behind me, so I can't see her, but I did see that she's there. Our guest speaker today is Cindy Marble. I've had the opportunity to know Cindy for the past 3 or more years. We've worked very, very closely on providing behavioral threat assessment training for Arkansas through CJI's Bureau of Justice Assistance grants. And Cindy has been an extremely valuable partner. She has, and I'm going to ask her because I'm sure she can attest to this much better than I can, but she's had a long history working with the U.S. Secret Service and is one of the best instructors I've ever had the opportunity to interact with. I asked her to be here today with us to talk about behavioral threat assessment. It's become a very, very important part of what any comprehensive school safety strategy should include. And so, Cindy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. May. Good afternoon, everyone. I really wish that I could be there in person with y'all. I am your neighbor next door in Texas, but I happen to, I guess I'm a displaced Texan at the moment. I'm in upstate New York, which is why you see the woods behind me. And it's about 30 degrees cooler here than it is where you are. So that may be one of the reasons why I'm up here. But as Cheryl said, I have been working with Arkansas CJI on providing behavioral threat assessment training. Our whole team, we were a small threat assessment firm. We now have a parent company called Ontic Technologies that we work with, that works to provide protective intelligence and threat assessment training and assistance in helping keep schools safe, businesses safe. And I always want to remind our folks at schools that schools are a workplace. So one of the things that we're always working to do is prevent not only school violence, but workplace violence. So when I talk about threat assessment, in this case for us today, we're going to be talking about school-based threat assessment, but it really is a process that I used in my career as a U.S. Secret Service agent, and I'll go into that in just a second. But it's a process that I used as an agent. It's a process that I use now as a civilian who not only trains threat assessment in schools and workplaces, but I also consult on cases. So a little bit about my background. I've been with Ontic Sigma for 6 years, doing this as a civilian. Prior to that, I had a 27-year career with the U.S. Secret Service, and my last position was the senior executive, member of the senior executive service. I was the special agent in charge of the Houston district with responsibility of Houston, Austin, and Mexico, overseeing all investigations there and protective measures that we took in support of the president's detail and vice presidents, et cetera. I did 2 tours on the president's detail my last time there as a senior supervisor. And another place that I used this process, an assignment that I had as a Secret Service agent, was as a member of the Combating Terrorism Office in the National Security Council. So I was detailed from the Secret Service over to the National Security Council, working counterterrorism cases. So that's all to tell you that I come to this with a background of protection, of using this methodology that we're talking about now as threat assessment, but what I always knew as in my entire career as protective intelligence, really with the information or the emphasis being on protection, but the information that we gather so that we can protect. And that really is the basis of what threat assessment is. I want to run through, and I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence, and I spoke with Dr. May about this yesterday, about I don't want to take this down to such a base level that people, they know what I'm talking about already, but there are some folks who either have a misconception of what behavioral threat assessment is or truly don't have any knowledge of what it is. So I want to go through quickly what behavioral threat assessment is, kind of looking at it first from the lens that I came from, and now the lens that I'm looking through now as someone who's helping to keep schools safe. And you'll forgive me, please, for looking at notes. As Cheryl said, when I instruct, this is something that I've lived for 32, 33 years now, my entire adult life. When I teach, I can really have the time to spend to convey that I'm teaching. When I'm on Zoom and I have less than an hour, I'm going to take a look at my notes because I want to make sure that I touch all the points. Going back to what threat assessment is, and it's really important to understand what it is and what it's not. Threat assessment is a fact-gathering process when we are presented with behavior of concern. And I'm going to go into behaviors of concern in just a minute. But back when I was a Secret Service agent, when someone presented themselves, whether it was showing up at a site, showing up at the White House, writing a letter, making a phone call back then, or even a social media post, the work that we did to determine if someone didn't pose a threat to us, most of the times when these people came to our attention, they did not make a threat. And it's very important to understand that what we were seeing was not on its surface threatening behavior. What was coming to us was not a direct threat, but it was behavior of concern. The work that we did to determine if that person did not pose a risk to us, what we called then protective intelligence and still call protective intelligence, but in the civilian realm, it's called threat assessment or behavioral threat assessment. It's the work that needs to be done to determine that somebody doesn't pose a threat to you. How is that done? The first thing that we have to do is identify the people. They come to us or they're reported to us based on somebody else's concern. Again, this concern does not mean necessarily that the person has made a threat, but their behavior is worrisome to somebody else and they bring it to our attention. What we need to do is gather information to find out if this person poses a threat. We like to say when we train, we collect the dots so we can connect the dots. Most of the information about a person of concern is in many different places. And I say this because one of the things that we emphasize and one of the things that we've seen go wrong, and I'm going to talk a little bit about things going wrong a little bit later. One of the things that we've seen go wrong is that information comes to us. One person is looking at it and then makes a determination about it without really doing a lot of legwork. What we're trying to find out in behavioral threat assessment is the why, the WHY behind the behavior. Why behind the behavior? What is the function of the behavior that we're seeing? Why is this person acting out in a way that we're seeing? When we get an understanding of that, when we can collect enough dots that draw a picture for us, we connect those dots and we make an assessment saying, okay, based on everything that we know about this person, based on all the research that was done that gives us an idea, gives us this methodology of saying, okay, what I'm seeing is concerning to me. What I'm seeing makes me believe that this person is on a pathway to violence, meaning they have an idea to do harm, or they're planning or preparing to do harm, or they're not. And the distinction there is if a person is on a pathway to violence, we know how to respond to that. It may require law enforcement action, it may not, but we know that we have to intervene and we know that we have to get them off this pathway to violence. If they're not on a pathway to violence, what we may determine is that they need something else. They need some sort of support. So in a school-based threat assessment, we may find out that a student, we go through the threat assessment process and we may find out, well, we can't really tell if the student has an idea to do harm, that they're planning to do anything, but we do find out that the student is in need of maybe mental health resources, or maybe some other types of intervention, or maybe mentoring, or maybe just connection. That's also part of what a threat assessment team does. And actually, that's really the most important thing that a threat assessment team does. is they determine a student who needs help, needs assistance, and comes up with a management plan on providing that assistance for them. So again, going back to what threat assessment is, again, a 4-step process of identifying someone of concern, gathering information about that, making an assessment based on what we know others who have conducted acts of mass violence. Does it look like what others have done? Are we seeing the same types of pre-attack behaviors that others have done? Or are we seeing behavior that may not be threatening, but needs something else? And we come up with that management process. One of the biggest mistakes that we see often happen in school, especially school-based, but it happens in the others as well, is we identify a student of concern. And without doing those 2 steps in between, we quickly jump to management. A student makes a threatening statement, or a student writes a paper that is concerning, or a student acts out in a way that people feel threatened. The first thing that's done quite often is discipline. Without taking the time to look through and assess what's going on with the student. We go through a tabletop exercise when we train that talks about a student making a statement about, I think it would be cool if we had a school shooting. If the threat assessment team, that information was brought to a threat assessment team in our scenario, if that threat assessment team acted based only on that piece of information, they would have missed the fact that the student was going through some pretty rough times at home. Parents were divorcing. She had a breakup with a boyfriend. She had a fallout with another friend. She had contemplated suicide. She had actually started creating a list of people she didn't like. She had started posting things online about committing suicide. If the threat assessment team hadn't dug into that and found out all that information and possibly just disciplined the student for her act, then they would have missed a student in real distress. They could have taken action against her that could have pushed her further along that pathway to violence. So it's really important that we take the time to understand the why behind the behavior. What threat assessment is not, and it's really important that our staff understands this, that our educators understand this, but our students and parents as well, is that threat assessment is not an adversarial process. It is not meant to get people in trouble. It is not meant to get people arrested. It is not meant to have any type of law enforcement action unless, of course, a law is broken. It is meant to intervene and to help. In my entire time as a Secret Service agent, and I was based in DC for over 13 and a half years, Washington, DC and the White House is a magnet for people who are concerning to come visit, to approach, to try to see the president. In all of those times, in all of the cases that I worked, there were very few that required me to act as a law enforcement officer. What I did mostly was take a lot of people to the hospital to get mental health evaluations. I also connected them back to their mental health providers. I connected them to their families. I stood at Greyhound bus stations and train stations, getting them home to their loved ones. That really is the crux of what threat assessment is. It's about intervention and it's about helping people. And it's very important. I can't stress how important it is that our schools and our staff, and especially our students, because we're going to talk about that in just a second, how important it is that they know that. And our parents know that. The reason for that is if people think it's an adversarial process, they're less likely to bring information because that information may get their friends or their child or their friend's child or a student that they really care about in trouble. And they're hesitant to do that. If they know that our threat assessment teams that are in our schools and in our communities are meant to help, they're much more likely to bring information to us so that we can help and that we can intervene with those students. One of the things that I hear quite often in training is threat assessment is another thing that we have to do as schools, as school staff. And what I want to emphasize is that what schools are already doing, connecting with their students, asking questions, looking at things together and making assessments, bringing in the school-based mental health providers, bringing in behavioral intervention specialists, that's already being done. So the work of threat assessment truly is already being done. The problem that we have when we have different groups doing different work is that we get siloed information. That means what one entity is doing, maybe it's the school-based mental health professional is doing, maybe that's not being shared with the administration. Maybe that's not being shared with an established threat assessment team. What we want the threat assessment team to do is act as a threat assessment team, which means more than one. I always like to, again, growing up in the Secret Service, my whole world is the sports analogy. It's what you get when you work with mostly male population. You just learn a whole lot about sports. But you field a team, and when you have a team, not just one person goes out on the field or not just one person goes out on the court, but you want to bring this team together so that you break down silos of information. What you'll find out when you start doing a threat assessment investigation or inquiry, if you want to call it that, is that, again, there are different pieces of the puzzle that other people have. We need to bring that all together. So it's not something else that a school has to do. It's not one other thing on the to-do list for a school to do. It is actually bringing everybody together that they're already doing it and just putting it under the umbrella of threat assessment. The first thing that a school has to do, and we go through this in training, is to actually establish that team. Who's on the team? Obviously, if you have a school-based team, you're going to have your administrators on it, whether it's the principal or the assistant principal. You want to have a school-based mental health professional. I get the question, well, what if we don't have a school-based mental health professional? Then this is where we make liaisons and relationships in the community, and we ask for community support. Backing up real quick, this whole process really does include our community. We are not standalone when we are at a school. We are not standalone when we are at a corporation. We live and we work, and everything that we do is within our community. So we need to include our community in this process, whether it's to get information from them or to actually have them be part of our team if we don't have the luxury of having a school-based mental health professional. And a lot of rural schools don't. And a lot of schools that aren't well funded don't, because of location or whatever. This is, Arkansas is just like my home state, Texas. There are plenty of places that are, that are very rural and don't have access to these resources. So we bring in our community. So we have, again, our administrators, we have school-based mental health. We have an SRO or local law enforcement if we don't have, again, the luxury of having an SRO on our team. We can have people on there that are well-versed in IT or social media monitoring. Those folks come in handy to be part of our team. We also have, we advocate having a school nurse on the staff. You might even want to bring in a special education professional to be on the staff. Why do we need all these team members, and why do we need all these different disciplines? It's to look at things from different lenses, from different perspectives. And I want to go back real quick to our law enforcement partners who are on the team. They are not there only to act as law enforcement, as far as law enforcement action. They are not only there to make an arrest. They are not only there to do a custodial interview. A school resource officer or a local law enforcement officer brings to you a whole lot of community information. What's going on at that individual's home? How many calls have they made out to the house because of domestic violence or drug abuse or child abuse or something else going on? They're bringing information to the team that will be quite valuable to help you understand the why behind the behavior. So we have a team of people looking at something so that they all come at it from a different perspective, how they see things based on their background, based on their experiences, based on their education, based on the role that they have. So we start with our team. It must be multidisciplinary. The second thing that we do is define these concerning behaviors. Again, going back to the beginning when I talked about, threat assessment doesn't necessarily mean a threat has been made. We can't wait till a threat has been made. We need to look at things that are concerning to us. We need to look at a student who is being bullied or is being the bullier. Both are equally concerning. But most of the cases, the latest Secret Service report from the National Threat Assessment Center said most of the school-based violence cases are students who have been bullied. So we certainly want to look at a student who's being bullied and start to understand what's going on with them and providing support. We want to look at the person doing the bullying. Same thing. Bulliers usually come from people that bully them. So what's the behavior going on with them? We want to look at changes in behavior. We want to look at a student who is normally a good student and grades are failing. We want to look at a student who is normally, dressed like a normal teenager, but now coming to school dressed completely differently or completely unkempt. These are changes in behavior that are not necessarily threatening on the surface, but this is where we want to bring our multidisciplinary team in to figure out why. What's going on? Why is the student's grades dropping? Why is the student absent more than they normally have been? What's going on? At the crux of this is really wanting to have an understanding, again, of the why. And if we have that curiosity as a team, then we can put measures into place to hopefully help the student. Again, most of the cases that I worked didn't involve threats and didn't turn out to be threatening. But did they not turn out to be threatening because we intervened, because we provided intervention, because we connected that person back to their mental health provider or their family? I don't know. I really don't know, but I know that nothing happened. So the more that we do by looking at concerning behavior, not waiting for an obvious threat, not waiting for a student to show up with a weapon before we can act way before that. As a threat assessment team, even though it has that word threat in there, think of it again as protective intelligence. Think of it as a protective team. I see behavior that's concerning. I see a student whose behavior has changed. I see a student being bullied. What can I do? What can we do as a team to intervene and help this student? When we're building a program, another big piece of it is not only knowing what we're seeing and what to report, but how to report that information. I know Dr. May has talked quite a bit about an anonymous reporting system for schools to bring information to the threat assessment team. There's got to be an avenue of information. There's got to be a flow of information from a student or a parent or a staff member to bring information to the team. And I said I'd get back to students and how important they are. They are our best source of information. They see what's going on with their fellow students. They need a means of reporting. And a lot of them in their, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old minds are really conflicted about whether they tell or in their minds tattle or do they not say anything because they don't want to get their friend in trouble? So again, so important that they understand this is not adversarial, but it's equally as important that we give them an avenue of reporting that's anonymous, that they can put that information out there and walk away from it and not be accused of tattling. So it is so critical that we give everyone a means to report information to us. And one other piece that I want to go over quickly that's so important in this process, we talked about the 4 steps of the threat assessment process: identifying, assessing, gathering information, assessing, and then doing something about it. And it's critical that our schools have resources, identified resources of people and entities that can help, that can provide that intervention piece, not just school-based, because it may go beyond school-based. It may go out into the community of where we need mental health assistance outside the community, or we may need to bring in a mentor or somebody like that that can help that's not school-based. So having a really good list of resources for interventions and management of these cases. And lastly, climate in our schools. And I think every single solitary time that I've taught or had the pleasure of and honor of being with school personnel, I know that they care 100% about the climate that they have at their school, that people feel that they are safe, people feel they are trusted, and that they can go to a teacher or an administrator and give them information. It is critical that that exists in our schools, that there is a climate of, again, safety, of security, and of trust. And I know each and every one of our staff members and our teachers strives for that each day. But one of the things that we always recommend folks do is to do climate surveys. Find out really what your students feel, how they're feeling when they come to school. Do they feel like they can tell a trusted adult if something is concerning to them? And taking that information that we get from those surveys and sharing it, even if it doesn't come out looking as good as we thought it would, sharing it and then saying, we're going to do better. Those are just a couple of the steps of building a threat assessment process. Again, I do believe it's something that most schools are already doing. They're just not looking at it through the lens of being a threat assessment team. It's bringing everyone together. It's gathering information. It's understanding and really wanting to getting to the why behind the behavior and putting those intervention mechanisms into place so that if we had a student on the pathway to violence, that we get them off that pathway and we get them onto a better path. If we determine that the student's not on a pathway to violence, but they do need something else, we get them that intervention as well. I want to talk very quickly, and please somebody tell me how much time that I have left. I want to talk about a court case that was just ruled on not too long ago of a school district out in the Northwest. It's Taft Union High School. If you have the opportunity to pull up the appellate court ruling, I really encourage you to do so, because it talks about how a threat assessment was conducted at the school. And honestly, it describes what went wrong. The situation resulted in a student being shot, thankfully not killed. The court case was brought against the school district, and the school district was found 54% responsible for the action taken by the person who shot the other student. And I want to explain a little bit why. There were many, many signs, beginning with the fact that the student that conducted the act, who was the shooter, was bullied. His parents reported or his mother reported the bullying. It happened in a PE class. The PE class teacher's response to it is that the student should man up. The assistant principal's response to it was, boys will be boys. Not only did we have that one piece of information, but we had multiple pieces of information. And I mean, what was discovered and what the school had. The student made numerous comments that frightened not only staff members, but students, all of which were brought to the attention of the assistant principal. The assistant principal, acting only with the school-based psychologist, determined that the action that they would take would be to suspend the student, to not get to the why behind the behavior, to not get an understanding of what was going on with that student. There are many, many facts that I won't go into in this venue, but I want to tell you what, in expert testimony, a person who does the work that I do looked at the case and determined that this threat assessment that was done, and it was considered a threat assessment by the school, did not meet the standard of care because it was not carried out by a team collectively. This is going back to that multidisciplinary team looking at it through a lens and sharing information. The school resource officer, it was determined, should have been a core member of the team and not just sent to do law enforcement action. He was actually sent to the home to search the home for guns and other weapons, but otherwise was not brought into the discussion of the student. The team failed to communicate amongst themselves. Again, this is going back to, we've got a whole bunch of people doing different things. We need to communicate amongst ourselves in the team, in the school, to make sure nobody's missing any of those very, very important pieces of this puzzle. And the other thing that they found was the threat assessment team failed to adequately inform the parents. There was a lot of information that was gathered at the school that the parents were not aware of. I know sometimes we find that hard to believe, that parents aren't aware, they're right there, it's under their noses. It has been my experience in multiple different situations that parents are sometimes too close and don't know what they're seeing. But when information is provided to them, they themselves can help take protective measures and help intervene if they're aware of the situation. The threat assessment team failed to do that ever important management piece of recommending counseling, not only to the person, the subject or shooter's parents, but to himself as well. They didn't do any type of intervention piece, and they didn't do any type of active monitoring of the student during this process of threat assessment or afterwards. It's that very important management and intervention piece, which includes active monitoring and a safety plan. I want to point out that we can't control everything. When a person is at the point of doing what this student did, or what we saw in Uvalde, or what we've seen in multiple other cases, they are at a point of desperation and despair. They are at the point where they don't think there is another way out. A lot of these situations are suicides with collateral damage. They don't want to feel the pain that they're feeling. And they sometimes want others to feel the pain that they are feeling. When we fail to intervene, when we fail to provide a safety plan, when we don't manage the situation, we can't control. We can get this person as much help. We can get this person to connect them to resources. But we also have the responsibility of putting that protection measure into place. So we can't control everything, but we can manage a situation by helping the student first, and putting those protective measures in place in our school, which usually turn out to be physical protection measures. So again, management of this is key, of every situation is key. We need to make sure we understand the picture that we have in front of us and put the appropriate management into place. I have time for questions. If you all have questions about the process, about what we're doing in school, what we're seeing, I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Cindy. You did a fabulous job. I do have one question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
And you mentioned, and you included this several times in your presentation, that there's a tremendous amount of diversity on the size of the school.
Yes.
And could you talk a little bit about at what level these teams maybe should be? You know, if you've got a big school system or a small school district, could you just spend a little bit of time talking about that?
Absolutely. One of the things that we know is, again, there are the smallest schools of, 70 kids. And then, in a district where I am north of Houston, where we've got, 2 high schools with 4,000 kids each and bigger. Austin ISD right up the road for me with 80,000 kids is a whole lot different than a West Texas school district. And the same thing goes for Arkansas. The type of team that you should have is really based on the resources that you have. We advocate for, especially in a larger school, in a high school or junior high, to have a school-based team, to have these resources on the ground. In a smaller district, you may not have that luxury. You may need to go to a district-based team where there are district administrators, sometimes an assistant superintendent or superintendent actually is the team captain, if you will, or the lead, who organizes this team and brings the resources together, who looks at all the schools because of the size of the district. There is not one way that it should be done. It is the way that works best for each district. So if you have the ability to put a team at each school, then I say more power to you. That's fantastic. If you don't, then having a district-based team is how you work it. And that district-based team works with people that are the boots on the ground, are the assistant principal and the principal, to get that information from them. One of the things we say is having those core members, but bringing in the ad hoc members as needed. So if you have a district-based team, make that school principal or assistant principal an ad hoc member. Bring them into your team to work this particular case. We had one school district that we worked with that had the elementary school art teacher as an integral part of the threat assessment team. Why? Because she knew everyone. Because from pre-K through 6th grade in that school, she knew every one of those students. So we have to be flexible on how our team is made. We have to be flexible about whether it's district-based or school-based. Do what's best and where you have the best resources and the best diversity amongst the team.
Anybody else have any questions for Cindy?
Yes, ma'am. How do you handle privacy issues in these cases? In schools, we have a lot of challenges with privacy where people are scared to tell teachers or counselors or all kinds of stuff because of privacy laws.
Right. It's a fantastic question, and I'm glad you brought it up because it is something that we go through in every one of our trainings because it is a great concern. And there has been, again, a misconception about FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, that makes people fearful about sharing information. One of the things that I advocate folks to do, especially on the school level, is to to take a look at FERPA, at the act, and go right to the part that says threat assessment and understand that there is a safety and security clause built into FERPA. This actually was in there, but was made more pronounced after the Virginia Tech shooting, because one of the things that siloed information prior to that account or that act was the fact that people were afraid to share information based on FERPA. FERPA does not govern observation. It is school-based record only, meaning a person's personal information. But it does not have any jurisdiction over what a teacher may observe in class, what another student may observe or a staff member may observe, a student's writing. Oftentimes we get, and there have been cases that we've worked where a student has written something that has been very concerning, and a teacher has been afraid to bring that to the attention of the administration for fear of violating privacy. So it's an education that we need to embark on with our staff. We need to dig into that and say, okay, first of all, I always say, don't fear FERPA. There is no right to private action when it comes to a violation of FERPA, meaning you can't be sued. You will not be sued. Your district will not be sued. There have never been any type of actions such as that toward any school. The most that might happen if there is a violation of FERPA is that you're going to have to get a re-education on what FERPA is. But there is nothing when somebody has a concern, and this is why it's really important. Not only do we train our threat assessment teams on the whole methodology and the process of working through a threat assessment, but we need to train our staff, all of our staff, from our custodial services to our food services, to our bus drivers, to our educators, that if they see something of concern, and these things that I listed to y'all before, unkempt, grades that are failing, all these other behaviors that they see every day, that bringing those to somebody's attention does not violate that student's privacy. They need to feel comfortable. They need to know that bringing that information will not get them in trouble. So it is something that we have to make a conscious effort of doing to educate all of our staff. The same thing goes for HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Privacy Act. That's something that we as individuals hold. That's our information that we have a right to either let somebody know about or not. So in our training, we go into both FERPA and HIPAA in depth, and it is a great concern. So we need to make sure that our staff is educated on that. You're not going to get in trouble if you can articulate a safety and security concern. And honestly, if you see something that is concerning to you and you feel that this student may do something, that has to be brought to somebody's attention. I think I would much rather get my wrist slapped by the FERPA people, knowing that nothing more than that's going to happen, than take that chance of not providing that information to someone who could bring it to a threat assessment team or to the threat assessment team themselves and have them do something about it. So we need to pass that message to everyone in our schools that they need to share that information.
Anybody else have any questions? Great question, John. We good? Cindy, bottom of my heart, girl. Thank you very, very much. Excellent presentation. We're doing an advanced threat assessment class as part of our BJA grant. I think the class date is July 12th, if I'm not mistaken. And there's more that we're going to do. Thank you, partner.
All right. Thank you, Dr. May. It's an honor to be with y'all today. And the work that y'all are doing is just amazing. I think y'all should be extremely proud of your state, what Arkansas CJI is doing. You're really so far ahead of the game. We work in a lot of states, work with a lot of schools. The work that's being done here is really second to none. So I think you guys need to be proud of what you're doing.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I
You can't
appreciate
see
y'all.
me, but I've got a big smile on my face.
I appreciate y'all. Take care.
Okay, bye.
All right.
I'm a little biased, but I thought she did a phenomenal job. The important thing I think for all of us to understand, most importantly, it's about helping the kids. Being able to identify kids who are potentially on a path to violence and try to change that trajectory. That's not going to do anything but an enormous amount of good for the child, the school, the entire community. So that's why I've personally bought in to behavioral threat assessment. Okay, the next thing on the agenda is we're going to have a. Let me do this first. Does anybody have any ideas on who might be a good presenter? Now, here's the thing that I wanted to broach with you all, and we hadn't talked about it yet. Our next meeting is July 5th. Can I emphasize that that's the day after July 4th? Do we want to meet on that day? Do you all think we're making a significant amount of progress? Courtney, you want to please? They'll throw
No,
stuff
I
at
don't want to
you.
be the one that says we have to meet on the 5th. The only thing I will throw out there is we had a couple of members from the department going to present on that day. It's perfectly fine if we reschedule that. It would have to be rescheduled for 2 weeks out though, because
Oh, because of the summit.
the 12th is our ADE summit. So I just
Okay,
wanted to
so
throw
then
out there.
that would mean that I'd have to come up with some presenters, or we'd have to have longer discussions as a group about particular topics. So, while there may be an opportunity for a break, that'll be very short-lived, is what you're telling me. Well, it's up to you all. I mean, I'm in for the duration. So you tell me, what do you want to do?
I will say I'm good with it. Meeting the day after 4th of July, Dr. May. I mean, I know our interim reports due August 1st. That's not a lot of time if we start taking weeks off.
Okay, all right. Then we will meet on July 5th. They're going to blame it all on you.
I'm kind of used to that.
Yeah, we'll meet on July 5th at 1 o'clock as scheduled. We're going to hear from our subcommittee chairs. Unfortunately, one of our subcommittee chairs isn't going to be able to be here today, and that's Secretary Cook, because she went to the funeral today, and I'm very, very grateful for her and the AG for doing that. But I do want to make a couple of comments about subcommittees, just so everybody is on the same page. Subcommittees, the voting members of subcommittees are, of course, commission members. The members on this commission were appointed by Governor Hutchinson, and only commission members on the subcommittee are voting members. I've been given authority to be able to ask select individuals to function as subject matter experts. Those subject matter experts, and I've assigned a lot last week. I think some of the discussions we had last week were just truly extraordinary. And I think the SMEs contributed to that greatly. So I think conceptually it's very fine. It worked out great. But I also want us to know that if there's somebody that, you think would be a good SME that we haven't included, to please run it by me. And the other thing to understand is that it's very important that they know that they are non-voting members. And I have spoken to a couple of folks recently. One of the groups that we don't have at the table with us is the School Boards Association. And so I'm working with them right now to be able to identify a subject matter expert for a couple of our subcommittees. The other thing that's really important, and John's not cutting us any slack, but you know, we do have some key questions that we're trying to address. And we're close to, I think, in getting this done, but we need to identify all the progress that's been made with respect to the 30 recommendations. And I think we're getting really close to having that all mapped out. And the other thing is identifying any questions that we might want to use within another assessment. I think in talking to the subcommittees, we've pretty much agreed that we would like to have an assessment done. I can get started on that. But we're going to have questions. Courtney, you know, we worked with Dr. Slagle at UA Little Rock. I've spoken to him and he's good to go. But I bet you the database that he used to send that out last time, since that was 3 years ago, is probably different. Is there a point person, or can you send me the name of the person at the department that can help him get the right contact information for that survey?
Yeah, I'll send that to you.
Okay, that'd be great. And then he can start moving that way. I know he's got to get some approval at UA Little Rock, but I don't, unless it's very unusual, and there are instances where it should be. You know, there are some questions that we asked last time that maybe we should ask this time, but I'm anticipating a lot of the questions that we're asking this time are going to be different than the ones that we asked last time. So, also the other issue is preparing for our interim report. Last time, I wrote the whole interim report. I don't want to have to do that unless it's absolutely necessary. So once again, the interim report is due August 1st. So if you tell me what, I'm going to leave it up to the chairs. Tell me how you want to do this. Let's have a discussion on that. Nobody's volunteering. You were at least dang acting chair. Dang acting chair.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I wasn't on the commission last year or in 18. How did you receive the information to compile your prelim report? Did the chairs furnish the information and you compiled it, or how did that work?
That was part of the process. And I attended every single subcommittee meeting, kind of sort of like I'm doing now, you know, to overall broaden my understanding, which I think is really important, and then got information. Now, when it came to the final report, the committees, we worked together. I worked with each committee on coming up with a final version for the final report. And our final report won't be due until October 1st. So I don't know if you guys want to start funneling me information. Tim, it looks like you're about to say something.
It's Dr. May. I was just thinking about what you were asking. If we could get maybe some type of high level framework of what you're looking for, then we'd be glad. I mean, I don't want to speak for all the subcommittee chairs, but I'd be glad to get you that information that would help you in putting together that interim report.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I think we've been following it all along. You know, if we look at the executive order, it kind of lays out in detail. So what we're trying to do is identify what we already know, what's been accomplished, what the status of school safety in the state is, And are there recommendations that haven't been remedied yet? And then are there new recommendations?
I agree with Tim. And I think that if we have a framework and like we just talked about, if we all kind of have that in writing and we know exactly what we need to focus on and pull together, that each of us should be able to pull that together for you where you're not writing the entire report.
Yeah, that's okay.
Mhm.
I survived.
Yeah, but
Barely. Yeah, absolutely. There is one thing that before we move on to the subcommittee reports, that I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about. In our original report, we talked about how we were broken into 5 different subcommittees, and that each of those subcommittees dealt with different topics and strategies. But the one thing that we were pretty adamant about was the fact that we're not advocating more for one of those 5, the recommendations from one of those 5 subcommittees over the other subcommittees, that we agreed that we advocated a comprehensive school safety strategy, that basically there wasn't one thing that a school could do that was going to eliminate the possibility of there being an incident at their school. That it's the well-rounded approach, the comprehensive approach. Is there anybody here that disagrees with that? Because that's what I'd kind of like to emphasize again this time as a general theme in what we're trying to do. So I hear no objections. Okay, I'm going to say it again. I hear no objections. So if you object, hold your peace, giving you a chance. Okay, we're going to reverse the order. And I've actually got Tim that's going to give his subcommittee report first.
All right, Dr. May, before I get started, I want to make sure I give an accurate report to you and the others. I just am not exactly sure the format you would like it. Would you like me to go through the minutes, or would you rather me focus more on some of our possible recommendations?
I think you need to talk about what you guys talked about.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. All right. So we started off last week's meeting with a talk on the partnership program, specifically how can we use partnership. And partnership program is a state funding mechanism for construction projects in schools, where there is a district share and a state share of that. And so there was some good discussion, I thought, on that as possible using partnership to fund security upgrade projects, which right now, as of 3 years ago, districts can apply for security projects. The problem is, as Chief Hollenbeck pointed out, the process is very long and cumbersome. There are, by rule and by law, it's done every 2 years. Projects are done on a 2-year cycle. Projects are funded by the commission every year. And so that mechanism is already there. But what the committee, and correct me, anybody on the subcommittee, please intervene here if I'm misrepresenting this, but there seemed to be somewhat of a consensus on going outside partnership for this one time, with the one-time surplus, to possibly use funds for security outside of partnership. That way it'd be streamlined. So districts could get the funds sooner and be able to do their projects. And that seems to make a lot of sense. And Dr. Anderson, also a superintendent from Cutter Morningstar, concurred with that. Dr. Hernandez had made that suggestion. So that's something we're definitely going to consider. And then you mentioned the SMEs, and we had several. We had Nathan Alderson, the state architect from Arkansas Building Authority. We had Dr. Nancy Anderson, Superintendent of Cutter Morningstar, Tyrell Pace, who's the Assistant Director with the division, Jason Black, the Assistant Superintendent, Conway Public Schools, Ron Self, Safety and Security Director, Little Rock School District, and Phil Blaylock, SRO from Morrilton. And they provided a lot of good information and feedback and suggestions throughout the meeting. On recommendation 1, the subcommittee talked about that, and that's the one talking about using REAMS to develop a customized state level school bus safety initiative. And based on all the research that has been done, it just seems like that was not a good alternative or a good way to do it. And so Dr. May made a suggestion that 15 to 20-minute portion of the required 3-hour annual bus driver training be focused on bus security. So we have a 3-hour annual bus driver training that every bus driver has to take in the state of Arkansas. And I believe there's a lot of consensus on that. So that's going to be a probable recommendation because that system already exists. And I talked to Mike Simmons, the Director of Transportation, and he said that would not be a problem at all. And then moving on to recommendation 2, as was stated last week, the Title IV funds, it just didn't seem like it was worth the effort to go through that process at the national level for just a small amount of funding. So there was a discussion over other federal funding options. There was discussion about making districts aware of what's available. We had some discussion about having a central grant writer position. And then Dr. May did a good job of just talking about the training that's already available through CGI. Yes, Dr. May.
Yes,
ahead.
what I will mention to everybody, obviously the big school safety legislation that passed last week. I'm trying to find out what specifics on grants that are going to be available through that legislation. Because they mention a substantial amount of money for mental health services for schools and also physical securities. So I'm going to try to get maybe Congressman Hill's office to help me a little bit with that, because I think it's important that we all understand what those resources are going to be. It'll take a while to get them in place, but there is going to be funding available.
Thank you, Dr. May. That's good. That's good news. We also talked about in recommendation 3, and that was one where districts create an online facility profile with a panic button and systems for each new campus or facility in the district to conduct annual reviews and update those profiles when needed. And we talked about how the facility profiles are already required by law. And that was done, I believe, in the last session. And something we all agreed on is we need to stop using the word panic button, because that just sends the wrong message to everyone there. But however, this is something we also had to talk about, so this fall under Physical Securities Committee or perhaps another one. We can talk about that now or at the end if you'd like. But one of the questions that was brought up for possible survey question is to ask, do schools have that? Have they uploaded their facility profile and provided that to their local law enforcement? Recommendation 4, that was the one that talked about the touch bars in place of crash bars. And we had discussion on that. And Mr. Self raised a good point that they're very expensive. Now these are required in any new construction. So the consensus was by everybody on the subcommittee was to leave it on the list, but let it be a low priority. And that kind of brings up the next point, which was talking about priorities. And Dr. May asked, and And I thought it was a good idea of us start to be thinking about what's our top three. So we have a list of physical security priorities. We've got it on the Google Sheet. And so one of the things for homework before our meeting tomorrow is for us to go in and kind of just be thinking right now about what's our top three items that we see based on all the information we're getting, and kind of start thinking through that. The other
Hey,
big
Tim,
one.
before you move on, let me mention this so everybody can understand. Last time when we did the assessment, we also asked the schools what their top three physical security priorities should be. So, that might be something that we want to do again this time. But the one thing that strikes me and that I think we all need to keep in the back of our mind is that I think the size of the school is going to, and how much money the school has, should be an important consideration. That there are schools out there that are very poor and that don't have the same resources that other schools that are much better funded have. So while we can come up with the top three, or ask them what their top three are, it may be dependent upon what size school they are.
That's a very good point. And the other high priority is, as Dr. May, as you've already mentioned, is coming up with a list of possible survey assessment questions. So that was also our homework for this week. And that's something we're going to talk about tomorrow morning at our meeting, is try to finalize those. If not finalized tomorrow, get it a lot closer to being finalized. So that piece can be in place. And then we're going to talk about physical security priorities, and also talk about possible recommendations that the subcommittee has already come up with.
Super job, Tim. Thank you, and the entire subcommittee. The next one is Secretary Cook, but she's not here. We do have Chief Chapman and Director Gary who are here, who can talk about some of the things that were discussed during that subcommittee.
So we had a presenter from the Fusion Center during our subcommittee meeting. So the majority of our time was talking about recommendation 5, which basically was how the Fusion Center could become more involved in the suspicious activity reporting, the intelligence gathering on school safety threats and analysis. They did a great job of presenting several different options with some vendors they are currently looking at, discuss their capabilities, not to specifically name any vendors today, but they are researching opportunities to do open source analysis and collection. Probably some great opportunities there. Talked about staffing a full-time position in the Fusion Center to do just that. And majority of our time was talking about those different platforms. Obviously, there was examples of where school mass shootings were prevented based on that intelligence gathering. And that's what we want to all see happen if we push the right resources into the right places. And I think there's a great opportunity there. So the majority of our time was spent discussing that recommendation. Oh, and obviously one of the big points of contention is that, the Fusion Center's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, unless there's an emergency situation going on at a state level. So anything else, AJ?
Yeah, I think you covered all of it. Some of the tools that they're looking at can actually send alerts after hours, so it wouldn't have to be somebody sitting there monitoring it, that it could send some information. And then this week, tomorrow, we'll be delving in a little bit on communications, and we'll have somebody from AWIN presenting to the subcommittee.
Yeah,
so I think it's it.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a very interesting discussion, to say the least. Chief?
I will add that some of these platforms allow for the anonymous reporting, mobile apps and those type things. So that could be a huge potential for us there as well. So thank you.
Any questions for intelligence and communications? Any members of that subcommittee want to add anything that they might not have discussed? I see Marvin down there.
Yeah, one additional thing that we talked about was a mechanism making ensuring that school personnel receive the information in a timely fashion so they can respond adequately to whatever the threat may be and actually utilize the resources as quickly as possible. That was a major piece that we discussed as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that the center, the Arkansas Center for School Safety is going to work with the Fusion Center to do. Just waiting for the MOU. So hopefully soon. Next on our list is Director Gary again for audits, emergency operation plans and drills.
Thank you, Dr. May. So we had a very lengthy and very broad discussion. I think we went just almost 2 hours and in our discussion. We also had some subject matter experts there kind of presented for us. Jeff Cullum was one, visited with us about the site assessment app that they're using, and also the it's free. The training on how to use it is pretty simple. He was talking maybe a couple hours to use that. We also had Bethany Swindle from Arkansas Tech University was there with us. Bubba Jones was one of the SMEs that also talked about assessments, and had 2 county emergency managers that we brought in as SMEs. We had Eric Wright from Greene County, Bo Robertson from Garland County. We also had quite a bit of discussion about standardized language. During, when we talk about assessments, site surveys, emergency operations plan, crisis plans, and all of that, there was a lot of discussion about, is everybody talking about the same thing when they throw terms out? So we really got into the standardized language, also for emergency operations plans. We also talked about, there's a lot of free resources out there from FEMA. A lot of their classes, just about all their classes are free, a lot of them online. So if school personnel do not have a clear understanding of emergency operations plans, that information is readily available to them. Again, Bethany Swindle from Arkansas Tech University spoke a little bit about that, and also about some of their additional curriculum. They do have an emergency management program, and also Arkansas State also teaches emergency management courses. We also discussed the importance of that county emergency manager. Every county, all 75 counties, have an emergency manager that is versed in emergency operations plans, also exercises, drills, so forth, and coordinating resources before, during, and after an event. They're required to be somewhat involved in that planning stage for an emergency operations plan. And we really talked about the importance of them being a part of that. We also, the good thing of having a couple of county emergency managers on there, we also talked about the fact that not every county is designed the same. Some of those emergency managers are full-time emergency managers in those counties. Some of them are part-time. They also may be the road foreman or other jobs. So we did talk about that kind of that broad spectrum there of emergency managers, but that the importance that they're working with that safety and security teams and safety coordinators. I think that was pretty much the biggest part of it. We also went over some possible survey questions. Tim, thanks for sending that email. Tim did a good job. Dr. May, I forwarded that email to you just earlier today. You may not have a chance to see it, but just kind of starting to get some ideas on some possible survey questions. So I think that's all in my notes. Any other subcommittee member, did I leave anything off?
Yeah. May I add?
Absolutely.
Thank you. One of the things that we did talk about that I think maybe we need to go in a little bit more depth on is the whole concept of that district safety and security team. I think one of the things that we focused on within the subcommittee was making sure that the schools understood what those are. And to provide them with a better definition and some guidance on what they are. I think the other thing that is really important, and it was 620 and 648, that in doing the comprehensive school safety audits, they're not due until 2024. But one of the things that was discussed in the group, and the reason why I want to address this here, is the fact that 2024 is going to be here before we know it. And so it's really important that the schools start getting a better handle on what these audits are going to include, how they're going to go about doing them, and the fact that the discussion also focused on the law enforcement Office of Emergency Management and Fire piece. And AJ, do you want to go into that a little bit more about how critically important it was that they cooperate and some ideas that were discussed during the meeting?
Sure, and I'm glad you mentioned that on the assessments, because that was another thing that we talked about with standardized language and so that we're all talking about the same thing. I think in the original report, it was, do assessments, but up to the schools to figure out what that assessment's actually going to look like. We had a lot of discussion about, the benefit if everybody's doing the same type of assessment using the same tool across the state. And as Dr. May said, we talked about the, that emergency management element being the one to pull the fire, police, medical services, kind of coordinate that and pulling all that together.
Yeah, and talking about how school districts can basically document and some ideas on where during that process that law enforcement would fit in, obviously where fire would fit in, and then obviously OEM. I also thought the discussion about, the language piece from we talk about emergency operation plans, then you hear somebody say crisis plans, then you hear somebody say continuity of operation plans. What are all of these? So
Sure, and I think that goes back to the resources that FEMA has. That common language is really there if we follow that template that FEMA has for the emergency operations plans. It's well established and well known, but again, it's getting back to that, making sure when we're talking about something that we're all talking about the same thing. I made a note when Cindy was talking. She made the comment, multiple people doing different things. And I think that was very, I kind of wrote that down because it's really what we were talking about.
Right. And when we did our last commission, yes, sir. When we did our last commission, we talked about how valuable the county emergency managers are and how critically important it is to get them integrated, and they know about emergency operations plans. So they're this tremendously underutilized resource for our schools.
Right, and the fact again that they're not all the same through the state. Unfortunately, some of them are part-time, and I think with the more duties going on them are being put on them, not only for school safety, but we've been saying for a while the importance of that county emergency manager for our natural disasters and being able to help the communities plan and prepare. School safety is just another thing that's added into that that they need to be able to do. Thank you.
And it's kind of like what Cindy was talking about too. If you notice, there's a theme here. It's not about having to recreate the wheel. A lot of these resources already exist out there. It's about being able to connect those resources. So, and that's another really good example. Okay. He threw you under the bus again today, huh?
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Dr. May. So we'll start off. We had a great conversation. We probably had a 2-hour meeting as well. We had some subject matter experts, particularly Assistant Chief from Mountain Home. Bubba Jones was on board and gave some really good insight as to some of the challenges that he's had running an SRO program for the last 25 years. But we started out recapping last week's meeting. We talked about obviously the survey. We haven't landed on a specific question on trying to determine how many SROs or CSSOs and so forth. So that still, I believe, is in the works. One of the items that we also recapped were policies and MOUs with not just law enforcement agencies and schools when they provide an SRO, but also as well as the institutional agencies, police agencies, not only have the model policies that are recommended by the Arkansas Chiefs Association, but as well as a MOU with their local law enforcement as to how they're going to respond to critical incidents at schools. One of the topics of our conversation was a active shooter course that is needed statewide for all law enforcement agencies, where we are all on the exact same page. So there is no confusion as to what is a barricaded subject versus a hostage situation versus an active shooter. It's imperative that all the first responders and law enforcement officers, police officers, SROs understand the importance of what the difference is, what the roles and the responsibilities of the officers when it particularly is a active shooter, which we all know is to quickly enter and eliminate the threat. And there's no waiting. So that's something that I think is vitally important, that we develop a policy, training and procedure statewide, so we all actually are on the same page. Dr. May.
Just like to add that the way in which that was framed would be by identifying objectives, if I'm not mistaken, that should be covered in any active shooter course, regardless of who did it, correct?
Absolutely. We also talked about Clarksville, obviously, is the model program for the CSSO. They actually have more of a blended model, so we wanted to potentially make a recommendation about the blended model, potentially where it's the SROs and CSSOs that are layering the specific schools. We had a great conversation also about institutional police departments not having a minimum standard, but making recommendations where they go above and beyond, such as trauma medic training, active shooter training, mental health training, and so forth. So we had a great conversation about that, recommending, I guess, model districts for that as well. We had kind of I sent out a spreadsheet looking for potential recommendations, and some of the responses, a lot of them obviously were for me, because I got to send out the Google sheet, but we had some really good other recommendations. One of the items that we talked about is that school resource officers now are not just trained to de-escalate and communicate and mentor, as well as be that person that provides safety and security. Now we also have to ask these officers to take it to the next level, as well as to be a first responder, tactical capabilities individually. So we also talked about the potential of funds that may be released. I think Dr. May, you made a suggestion that we actually asked for specific type of equipment. If we're asking officers who in the state of Arkansas, who I have total confidence would rush to the threat, but we need to make sure that they have the proper equipment to protect themselves, such as level 4 body armor, potential ballistic shields, or forcible entry tools in case a intruder somehow was able to manipulate the lock and barricade that door up. So we also talked about how the law enforcement and security subcommittee at times will overlap with other committees. but they all have the same mission in mind. We talked about Grand Master Keys and of course, other subcommittees are also talking about that, how important it is to share those keys with first responders and local law enforcement. We also talked the importance about adding additional training for CSSOs as well as institutional police officers, where potentially CGI or the center could actually host meetings where we can bring in other law enforcement professionals network and make sure that we are still on the cutting edge of responding to any type of critical incident. So that is pretty much what we talked about. If anybody else who is on the committee can add more, or Dr. May, if you recall any more, please feel free to add to my notes. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Excellent job. Lori.
Thank you. So the Mental Health Prevention Subcommittee met on Friday, and we started off with two guests that Dr. May invited from Sigma Threat Management Associates, Melissa Reeves and Dave Okada, sorry. And that consumed most of our meeting. It was such a great conversation just about their approach to training in behavioral threat assessment and the anonymous tip side of it, and how those two must exist together. And I think that was one of the main points that I brought away from that. And of course, there was a whole lot of information that went along with that, but how those two need to exist together and not separately. And so I think that I know that I feel strongly that will be a part of our recommendation moving forward, is how to state that in a manner that schools understand the importance of those two things existing and working together.
Yeah, and Cindy kind of, by talking about that court case, I think is
Oh.
a really good example of why they definitely need
Yes.
to exist together.
Absolutely. Yeah, that just kind of drove that point home for us. They gave us several state examples and contact for Colorado as well. Dave works with Oregon and their statewide reporting network. So just gave us some good information about that. I won't get into all of the specifics. Very similar to what we heard today in terms of who should be trained, kind of what that process looks like, et cetera. We talked about after that presentation, that took almost an hour and a half. And then we talked a little bit about our other recommendations and kind of how we want to look at our progress to date, but what we might consider moving forward. We decided on some information that we wanted to gather to better inform us. We talked about, and I believe it's from recommendation 1 with climate assessments. High reliability schools was a model that was supplied to schools in Arkansas after our first recommendations came out, or around the same time. And most of the schools are using that, but we aren't sure how many. So Crystal.
That's a question.
Right. Well, and we think that we have that data. Crystal is working with Department of Education. Actually, we have someone invited to our subcommittee meeting to give us a little more information about that. Stacy Smith's name was mentioned, and she's not available. She's mentioned somebody though that can come and help us with that. We talked a little bit about the counselor time ratios and just how that seems to vary based on the size of the building and what counselors are pulled to do when they're serving a 50 student building as opposed to an 850 student building, and just kind of some of those. We didn't have a specific recommendation or anything about that, but we just kind of discussed that a little bit. We talked about the specific recommendations that we want to drill in and identify the progress made and how we want to start talking about that for our report. Crystal's going to work on getting some information for us about recommendation 6 as well. We had SMEs present, Betsy Kendall from Department of Education, Nikki Edge from UAMS, and Scott Spainhour, who's the superintendent at Greenbrier, joined us, and they were very helpful. They all just kind of shared a little bit of their perspective and their history and kind of what they could bring to our process. And that was really good to have them on board. Nikki shared a little bit about the Trauma Resource in Schools partnership and what's being offered right now as kind of a post-crisis response, not the immediate crisis response, but more of the ongoing to prevent the trauma from having a lasting effect and how that can mitigate ripples of those tragedies into the school to last longer. So we enjoyed hearing about that some. We sort of ran out of time, and so I asked the committee to email me what their thoughts are in terms of survey questions moving forward, so that I can kind of compile a list and summarize and organize those. And on Friday, we will decide on our final recommendations of questions that we would like added to that survey.
There was one thing that we started talking about as a group in that subcommittee that I think is going to be a big part of our discussions moving forward. And that's the whole idea of the availability of mental health professionals, not only in Arkansas, but it seems to be an issue across the country as well. And you know, I remember, I think the thing was, oh, I'm grabbing my neck because my neck's getting sore, because here we are, you know, we're talking about, and rightly so, you know, talking about trying to get these kids as much mental health help as we can. But yet, if we don't have the professionals in place, and what are the alternatives to that? And that triggered another thought, if I may, about how I think it's important for everybody to understand that, you know, we talked about the interim report. You know, we still have until October 1st to do the full report. So we don't have to have each and every new recommendation and everything totally flushed out in the interim report. And one of the things I thought of, and I don't know why Lori's talking made me think about it, but we need to find out some data on Stop the Bleed. Who would be a good source of information on what's been done around the state on Stop the Bleed? Bill, do you know?
Possibly somebody down at Mills.
Because I know it was Little Rock, and I'm drawing the blank. But yeah, but Lori, I'm sorry. But yeah, I think the whole that whole issue is a huge one. That's going to have a tremendous impact.
Yeah, that we talked about that possibly as one of our questions in terms of access. What do your students have access to? And, you know, we can problem solve around that all day. The problem is if you don't have mental health professionals to serve them, to plug into those schools, you know, it's worse in our rural areas. So you can access telehealth in those areas. But if you don't have a therapist on the other end of that line, it's a huge problem for most providers that I know in the state right now. And Paula and Patricia can talk about that from a Medicaid standpoint as well. They can contribute to that discussion quite a bit.
I think that would be really important. I'd like to know a little bit more about the data associated with the Paula, if that makes sense, to kind of put it into that perspective.
Yes, we have a report that I think we're ready to release publicly, Trish, or we can release it at least to the work group first on the behavior. We have a behavioral health landscape report. So it gives all of the information from the all payer claims database. So we know that most of the mental health services are reimbursed through either Medicaid or another funder, so private insurance. But 2/3 of Arkansas children are on Medicaid, and we pay for a wide variety of mental health services. And so we can show you the numbers of children that have had a behavioral health diagnosis and who's paying for those services starting there. And so then our next phase on that is looking at some access issues.
And just to follow up on what Paula said, the initial report, which is that all claims report, will be released soon. But the follow-up to that will be a mapping, and we will look at providers throughout the state. So we're going to use that data to then go and look at where those claims are occurring, the professionals who are providing those services, and where they are. So we have a BH landscape report that's going to show spend, and it's going to look at all payers across that. But then our second part of that we are beginning work on now is to look at where all of these individuals are that are providing these behavioral health services.
Yeah, would that also include what they call school-based mental health clinics?
So if a school-based clinic bills Medicaid, for the services that would be inclusive. So we have two different ways of paying for that. So for our Medicaid providers, school becomes a place of service code. And then some schools have health centers that are typically federally qualified health centers that may also provide that service. And so there's a couple of different ways that services are provided on the school campus and funded through Medicaid. So it's a little trickier to get in there thinking about the two different ways it comes. And then we do have a third way where the schools can employ counselors and then they bill Medicaid directly, but it's a very small program. Most of the services are being provided by Medicaid provider that then goes into the school and bills it as a location.
Right, whether they're in the school or they're a community provider.
Yeah, so most of them
Partnership
are,
with the
yeah, the
provider.
vast majority are community providers that have an agreement with the school, go into the school and provide the services on site.
Gotcha.
So, and the second piece of work we're doing, and we have a big stakeholder meeting Wednesday, is looking at how to best use the workforce that we have there. So looking at any policies that we can alter and have services that are more a team-based approach. So kind of back to what you said about if we don't have enough mental health counselors, then who do we have to go in? And so bringing in more of a team-based approach, a counselor leads the team. And then we have paraprofessionals that can come in and work under a counselor or behavioral specialist. So we have some of that work going on that is looking at both rates for the service, because there's been a lot of conversation about rates. And then we also have that work going on around policies to make sure that we're using our workforce that exists currently in the best way we can.
Super. Lori, I totally derailed you. Is there anything else, ma'am, that you would like to add?
I'm easily derailed. No, we, and you and I are going to have a conversation too about this, but we want to drill down and look into some of the anonymous reporting systems that are out there and kind of get some information. We already have Friday's guest speakers lined out, the Fort Smith School District. With their system, it's going to share with us kind of what it looks like for them. And I'm really excited to hear about that.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. We'll meet Friday at 10.
Okay. Is there anything that we hadn't discussed somewhere along the line that we need to discuss? I think y'all are doing a great job in the subcommittees. They've been some really, really great conversations. And I think we're positioned to really move us as a state more forward on our comprehensive school safety programs for schools. I'm very proud of you guys. Very, very much so. And John, all I got to say is that if you're not here on the 5th, you better find a good place to hide. Okay, if we're coming back on the 5th, I'll entertain the most important motion. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
That was Lori.
Second.
Dr. Dunn, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Y'all have a great weekend and see you on the 5th. Okay, I've got to meet with some folks.